Welcome back to the vanished lands. Beneath the dense jungles of Mexico, swallowed by roots and silence, lie colossal stone faces staring into eternity. They are too heavy to move, too perfect to dismiss, and too mysterious to explain. Who carved them? Why were they left behind? And why did the civilization that built them, the Olmecs, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, rise with such brilliance, only to vanish as if they had never existed? This is not just a story of ruins and stones. It is a journey into prophecy, bloodlines, gods with jaguar faces, disasters that shook the earth, and a people who may have chosen silence over survival. A story where history blurs with myth, where tragedy and awe walk side by side, and where the greatest mystery is not how the Olmecs lived, but why they disappeared. Stay with me, and together we will step into the shadows of a forgotten world, a world that built everything, only to erase itself in silence. Deep in the sweltering jungles of southern Mexico, where the air hangs heavy with mist and every step is swallowed by the roots of ancient trees, lies a secret that has haunted explorers, archaeologists, and dreamers for over a century. Imagine walking through a forest so dense that even the sun struggles to pierce the canopy. The cries of unseen birds echo in the distance, and the undergrowth twists like a living labyrinth. Then suddenly, as if the earth itself wished to reveal its memory, you stumble upon a colossal stone face staring silently through the jungle gloom. Its lips are thick, its nose broad, its eyes carved in a way that feels strangely human yet utterly alien. It towers above you, not as a fragment of rock, but as a monument to a civilization forgotten by time. The first men to uncover these heads did not believe their eyes. They stood transfixed, their hands trembling against the moss-covered stone, whispering that they had found something impossible. These were not ordinary carvings, nor relics of casual worship. They were immense, some weigh more than 40 tons, crafted from basalt dragged from mountains miles away. How could people with no iron, no wheels, no beasts of burden have created such behemoths? Who were these artists, these engineers, these forgotten masters of stone? The jungle gave no answers. It only watched with its endless silence, the colossal head staring back with expressions that seemed alive, as though they had waited centuries for human eyes to return. The locals had always known of them, though they spoke in hushed tones. To the villagers, these heads were not relics but guardians, placed there by gods who once walked the earth. Some believed the faces were giants who ruled before man. Others whispered they were the likenesses of ancient kings who struck a pact with the stars. Yet when archaeologists asked, the details dissolved into myths like smoke slipping through fingers. What struck the explorers most was the uncanny nature of the features. The heads did not resemble the faces of the villagers around them, nor did they match the art of later civilizations like the Maya or the Aztec. They seemed older, heavier, more primal, thick-lipped, broad-nosed, with helmets etched upon their crowns, as if prepared for wars or journeys not of this world. Some speculated these were portraits of warriors. Others suggested athletes, even ball players from sacred games. But there was a darker thought that clung to minds of those who stood beneath these looming faces. What if they were not meant to resemble humans at all? Imagine, for a moment, standing in front of one. The jungle is quiet, too quiet, as if it knows you are trespassing. The head rises above you, twice your height, its expression frozen in solemn authority. Its gaze does not simply look outward. It pierces through you, as though weighing your worth. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the realization that whoever made this did so with knowledge, an intention we cannot easily explain. You touch the cold stone and wonder, what hands carved this? What tools shaped it? And most haunting of all, why were they abandoned, left to be swallowed by vines in silence? The discovery of these heads sent ripples through the world of archaeology. It was as if a ghost civilization had emerged from the shadows, one that predated the cultures we thought we knew. The Olmecs, they would be called, the mother culture of Mesoamerica, yet when their name was spoken, it felt almost fabricated, as if we were labeling something we did not understand simply to quiet our unease. For nothing about them fit neatly into history. They appeared out of nowhere, building cities, carving monuments, and mastering rituals. And just as suddenly, They were gone. The colossal heads are not scattered randomly. They are placed deliberately, often in ceremonial centers, as if they were more than art, perhaps sentinels watching over sacred grounds. Some lie buried, only their foreheads emerging from the soil like the last breath of memory, refusing to die. Others are tilted, cracked by time, but their expressions remain unbroken. Each one different, each one unique, suggesting they were not gods but individuals. Leaders perhaps, rulers immortalized in stone. Their gaze meant to outlast their empires. But why such effort? Why such enormity? And why the helmets, carved with detail too precise to be meaningless? Were they protection for warriors? Symbols of power? Or something stranger? Helmets for journeys beyond our understanding? As the heads became known to the modern world, theories multiplied. Some whispered of lost continents, of connection to Africa, of travelers who crossed oceans long before Columbus. Others, caught by the allure of mystery, claimed the Olmecs were touched by beings from the stars, visitors who shared knowledge of architecture and mathematics, then vanished. The academic world resisted such notions, yet the questions lingered, for the stone did not answer. It only stood in silence, massive, immovable, and enduring. But the true terror was not in how they were made. It was in why they remained, alone, unaccompanied by clear evidence of the people who birthed them. Entire cities once flourished around these heads, yet the cities crumbled, their inhabitants vanished, their culture erased as if by an unseen hand. It was as though history itself had conspired to forget the Olmecs, leaving only their stone witnesses behind. Explorers and villagers alike could not shake the feeling that the heads were more than relics. They were echoes of a civilization that should not have vanished so swiftly, that should not have been so completely swallowed by time. Imagine the story told at night, beside a fire in the jungle, an elder's voice trembling as he recounts the legend that the Olmecs had risen too high, too fast. They spoke with gods, they bent rivers to their will, they carved mountains into monuments, and for this hubris, the gods, or perhaps something darker, erased them, not with fire or war, but with silence, a silence that left only stone to testify they had ever lived. The first explorers to document the colossal heads confessed a strange unease. One claimed that at dusk, as shadows stretched long, the heads seemed to shift, not physically, but in essence. Their expressions grew heavier, their eyes deeper, as if they awakened with the coming dark. Another swore he heard whispers, faint and unintelligible, carried by the jungle wind. He wrote in his journal, "They are not statues, they are watchers, and we were never meant to find them." He died before his notes could be studied in detail. His last entry ended with a single line underlined twice, "The mothers of men erased." Archaeologists call the Olmecs the mother culture of Mesoamerica because every civilization that followed, the Maya, the Aztec, the Toltec, seemed to echo them. Their gods resembled Olmec gods. Their ball games mirrored Olmec rituals. Their calendars, even their hieroglyphs, bore traces of Olmec invention. Yet the Olmecs themselves had no clear predecessor. They seemed to appear fully formed, as though knowledge had been handed to them whole, without the slow climb of cultural evolution. It is this sudden emergence that troubles scholars to this day. How can a first be so advanced? And how can they vanish without leaving their story? Standing before the colossal heads, you cannot help but feel that these are not beginnings, but endings. The sheer weight of the stone, the solemnity of the faces, the silence of their surroundings. It feels less like the birth of a culture and more like its funeral. The Olmecs are remembered not for their rise, but for their absence, for the void they left behind, a void that echoes louder than the ruins of empires that came after. As night descends upon the jungle, the colossal heads fade into shadow. Their features blur into the darkness, until only the impression of eyes remains, glowing with the memory of a civilization erased. The explorers who found them returned to the world with stories of wonder and dread. They spoke of the mother culture no one remembered, the roots of Mesoamerica hidden in the mist. But they also whispered that the Olmecs felt different from the cultures that followed, as if they were not the first chapter of history, but the last echo of something even older, something erased so thoroughly that only stone could betray its existence. The colossal heads still stand today, scattered across the jungles of Mexico, silent as the centuries roll by. Tourists gaze at them, scholars measure them, cameras capture their features, but none can answer questions that linger in their stony gaze. Who carved them? Why were they abandoned? And what fate swallowed the people who raised them? For every explanation, there's a gap, a shadow where certainty dissolves. The heads are too massive to move, yet they were transported miles from their origin. The culture that made them was advanced, yet it vanished without trace. They are said to be portraits of rulers, yet their features do not match those who followed. The Olmecs are called the mother culture, yet they feel like orphans of history. The colossal heads remain staring in silence, guardians of a mystery too great to be dismissed. But if the stone monuments mark the echoes of something erased, then behind them lies a question far more unsettling. How did such a people come to exist in the first place? How could the Olmecs, in the shadows of forgotten millennia, rise so suddenly with knowledge so profound that they became a foundation upon which all of Mesoamerica was built? This is a story not of their disappearance, but of their astonishing birth, a beginning that feels less like the dawn of a civilization and more like the reawakening of something ancient. When we look back at the great civilizations of the world, there is often a trail of steps, a slow march of progress. Tools evolve, agriculture takes root, villages grow into towns, towns into cities. We can follow the line like footprints in sand. But with the Olmecs, the footprints are missing. What we see instead is the impression of a leap, as if they appeared fully formed, with calendars that measured time, sacred rituals that shaped destiny, art that spoke of gods and mysteries, and perhaps even a system of writing that whispers of forgotten stories. Archaeologists call the Olmecs the mother culture of Mesoamerica, because nearly everything that followed, the Mayans with their star maps, the Aztecs with their temples and sacrifices, the Toltecs with their myths of creation, can be traced back to the Olmecs. They were the seed, the first bloom in the dense jungle of human history in the Americas. But what kind of seed could sprout into such a fully grown tree? What hand planted it? The Olmecs built great ceremonial centers, not simple villages. San Lorenzo La Venta, Traceapotes, names that still cling to ruins buried in mud and vines. In San Lorenzo, around 1200 BC, they constructed massive platforms, terraces, and water systems. They sculpted with skill, aligning their monuments to celestial paths, as if their eyes were forever fixed on the sky. They worshiped gods not merely as distant beings, but as presences woven into jaguars, serpents, birds, and flames. Their rituals carried echoes of something deeper, an understanding of cycles, of time, of the sun, of death and rebirth. And in their carvings, some see the first signs of writing, symbols that hint at stories we may never fully decipher. The calendar, that strange device by which civilizations master the rhythm of existence, is believed to have roots in Olmec knowledge. To measure time is to master destiny, to align the human heartbeat with the pulse of the universe. The Mayans would later perfect it, but the Olmecs lit the torch. How, then, did they learn to count the heavens, to read the stars, to mark eclipses and solstices? This is no small leap. To leap so far, without footprints, is what makes their birth feel so uncanny. Their art, too, reveals sophistication far beyond the ordinary. Jade figurines polished to brilliance, faces carved with emotion, beings that seem half human, half divine. They sculpted the jaguar not as an animal, but as a bridge, a doorway between realms. For them, the jaguar was a master of thresholds, prowling between night and day, life and death, human and God. What kind of mind in such an early age creates such symbolism? It is the mind of a people who see the world not only as it is, but as it might be when viewed through other eyes. Yet what unsettles scholars most is the suddenness. Civilizations are expected to stumble, to rise slowly, to fall and rise again. But the Olmecs appear like a flame in the dark. One moment, the jungle held silence. The next, colossal heads stared across plazas. Rivers were redirected by engineered canals, and rituals bound a living to the divine. It is as if knowledge descended upon them, and they simply carried it forward. Some say the Olmecs were first to invent writing in the New World. Strange glyphs carved into stone slabs seem to tell stories, though we cannot read them. Were these symbols the beginnings of history itself, or were they fragments of an older script, carried from a people we no longer know? Scholars argue, but the silence of the glyphs endures. It is as if the Olmecs left us a key, but the lock it opens has been swallowed by time. And so the whispers begin. Perhaps they were not the first. Perhaps there was another, an older people whose name is gone, whose ruins lie hidden deeper still in the earth. Perhaps the Olmecs were not inventors, but inheritors of wisdom that came before, wisdom they carried like torches through the night of history. If that is true, then who taught the teachers? Who carved the first marks? Who aligned the first stones? Who whispered the first prayers to gods that crossed the threshold of reality? Legends from later civilizations speak of ancestors who came from the east, from across the waters. They speak of beings who descended from the stars, of gods who walked the earth teaching men to farm, to build, to worship. Could it be that the Olmecs were the first receivers of this forgotten gift? Or were they the survivors of an older cataclysm, carrying the memory of a world destroyed? The thought haunts like a shadow, for the Olmecs inherited their brilliance. Then somewhere in the silence of prehistory lies a vanished civilization greater still, one that gave birth to the mother culture. But where did it go? Why do we find no clear trace, no monuments that speak its name? Unless erasure was not an accident, but a choice. The Olmecs worship gods of transformation, the man jaguar, the feathered serpent, the rain spirit, all beings that shifted between states of existence. Transformation was not fear to them. It was destiny. Did their rituals reflect not only myth, but memory? Did they once witness a transformation so great that an entire people crossed a threshold we cannot follow? Did their teachers step into another realm, leaving the Olmecs to echo what they had seen? The jungles of Tabasco and Veracruz still whisper stories. Farmers plow in their fields unearth jade masks, broken altars, figurines buried carefully as if in ritual. These are not signs of chaos, but of intent. The Olmecs buried their treasures, as if concealing something, as if hiding the keys given to them by a people they could not name. Some archaeologists argue that the Olmecs had contact with others across oceans. The colossal heads, with their broad features, fuel speculation of African influence, though evidence remains elusive. Others argue for independent genius, that human creativity itself is enough to explain the leap. But the unease persists. Civilizations do not bloom without roots, and the roots of the Olmecs are missing. The mystery deepens when we realize that the Olmecs were not content with mere survival. They did not only farm corn and squash, fish rivers, and hunt deer. They dreamed in stone and jade. They aligned cities with the stars. They carved gods that blurred the boundaries of human and divine. They performed rituals of blood and sacrifice, believing that only by feeding the gods could the cycles of time continue. These are not the practices of beginners. These are practices of people who already understood that existence is fragile, that the universe is a balance held together by offerings and prayers. If this knowledge was inherited, then where are the traces of those who gave it? If it was invented, why does it appear so suddenly, with such completeness? Either answer is unsettling. Either the Olmecs were touched by hands from beyond oceans, beyond memory, beyond even the stars, or they were the final echo of a civilization that has been erased so completely we no longer even know its name. And so the suspense arc tightens. Scholars stand over the ruins, piecing together fragments, but the fragments whisper of something more, a vanished culture beneath the vanished culture, like a ghost beneath a ghost. The Olmecs are called the mother culture, yet they themselves may be orphans, children of a people lost forever. The colossal heads we met in the jungle are not simply monuments to kings. They are monuments to memory itself, to a civilization that may have been remembering something even older, carving the faces of leaders who carried whispers of vanished teachers. And perhaps that is why the head seems so alien, so uncanny. For they are not only Olmec, they are the faces of knowledge older than the Olmecs, frozen in stone so it would not slip away entirely. But this only sharpens the final question, the cliffhanger that hangs over the tail like a blade. If the Olmecs inherited their wisdom, then where are their teachers now? If the mother culture had parents, why have they been erased? The jungle answers with silence, the ruins with shadows, the stone heads with stares that do not blink. Somewhere, buried in the depths of time, the answer lies, but until it is unearthed, we are left with a chilling realization. Civilizations do not vanish without trace unless something or someone wanted them gone. And as the firelight of history flickers, we must ask ourselves, who lit the flame of the Olmecs, and who snuffed out the torch before we could know their name? In the heart of the Olmec world, where rivers cut through the jungle like veins of life and temples rose like islands of stone above a sea of green, the people gathered in shadows lit only by fire. Their eyes turned not to men but to beings of another kind, figures that blurred the line between human and beast. On the walls of their sanctuaries, carved in jade and basalt, painted in ochre and blood, one image recurred again and again: the jaguar, not merely as an animal, but as a god, a force, a mystery. The Olmecs worship many things, yet none more powerfully than the man-jaguar, a hybrid that haunted their imagination and bound their rituals to something greater than themselves. Why the jaguar? In the jungles of Mesoamerica, the jaguar was the apex predator, a creature of silence and shadow, capable of vanishing into night or striking without warning. To the Olmecs, it was not only power, but transformation. The jaguar could move between realms, walking the earth by day, ruling the darkness by night. It was a symbol of thresholds, of life and death, of dream and waking, of human and divine. And so they carved its likeness onto altars, painted its spotted pelt on walls, and told stories of kings and shamans who could merge with its spirit. In their mythology, the jaguar was no ordinary beast. It was a bridge to forces beyond comprehension, a doorway into the hidden architecture of the universe. Children born of union between women and jaguar gods were said to possess power. Rulers destined to guide the people, shamans destined to open the gates between worlds. These half-human, half-jaguar figures appear again and again in their art, eyes wide with otherworldly intensity, mouths curled into snarls that are not quite animal and not quite man. To see one is to feel unease, as if staring at something the human mind was not meant to fully grasp. Archaeologists have unearthed figurines of these hybrids, small statues carved with care, their faces both childlike and terrifying, their bodies twisted in ways that suggest metamorphosis. Were they gods? Were they memories of rituals? Or were they warnings, reminders of a power that was both sacred and dangerous? No one can say for certain, but the presence of these figures reveals the depth of Olmec belief, a belief that the world itself was layered with unseen realities, and that through ritual, one could cross between them. Their temples were not merely places of worship. They were laboratories of soul, where human beings attempted to dissolve the boundaries that held them to ordinary existence. Blood flowed freely on those stone floors, not out of cruelty, but out of conviction that only through sacrifice could the doors be opened. The jaguar demanded offerings, and the Olmecs gave them, believing that life itself was a debt owed to the gods. The cries of the sacrifice were not screams to the Olmecs. They were prayers carried into the night, feeding forces that held the universe in balance. But what was it they sought to touch? What waited on the other side of those rituals? In the silence of their temples, with smoke rising from incense and drums echoing like a heartbeat, the Olmec shamans entered trances. They consumed hallucinogenic plants, cut their flesh, offered their blood, and claimed to transform into jaguars themselves, roaming through worlds unseen. Did they see visions of stars, of realms beyond? Did they speak with gods that were more than myths? To them, it was not illusion but truth, and to the modern mind, the possibility lingers. Were they connecting with something beyond human comprehension? The stars were their constant companions. Their rituals often aligned with celestial events, eclipses, solstices, the rising of certain constellations. In darkness, when the sun was swallowed by shadow, the Olmecs gathered in awe and terror. To them, the eclipse was not a natural event but a cosmic struggle, a battle between forces that could erase the world if not appeased. Their jaguar gods were guardians of these thresholds, protectors against the closing of the sky. And so they offered blood, believing it could restore balance, believing it could keep the universe from collapsing. Imagine the scene: a temple at La Venta, firelight flickering against colossal altars, the air heavy with incense and sweat. The priest stands clad in jaguar skin, his face painted with spots, his eyes wide as he chants to the rhythm of drums. The people kneel, trembling, as the sky above begins to darken unnaturally. The light of day swallowed by shadow. Gasps rise from the crowd. Children clutch their mothers. The jaguar priest raises a blade of obsidian and draws blood, offering it to the heavens. The eclipse passes, the sun returns, and the people cry out in relief. To them, the ritual worked. The gods have been fed and the world preserved. But if these rituals were only symbolic, why did the Olmecs hold to them with such fervor? Perhaps they had seen something once, something that convinced them that the jaguar gods were not imagination but reality. The hybrid figures, the eclipses, the trances, they all point to a civilization reaching desperately toward forces that lay beyond the visible world. Forces that might have been real, forces that might still be watching. Their mythology speaks not only of creation, but of destruction. For every god that gave life, there was another that threatened to take it away. The jaguar was both protector and predator, guardian and executioner. To worship, it was to court danger, to walk the thin line between salvation and annihilation. And perhaps this is why the Olmecs lived in such awe and fear, building their culture not only upon agriculture and trade, but upon rituals of blood and shadow. The psychological weight of this cannot be ignored. Imagine growing up in a world where every eclipse was a warning, where every jaguar's roar in the jungle was a voice of the gods, where every king claimed descent from creatures that were not wholly human. The mind of the Olmec was shaped by mystery, by fear, by reverence. Their civilization was not built only in stone and jade, but an invisible architecture of belief. And yet, buried in their art and their myths is something darker still. At La Venta, a stone altar was found, carved with images of a ruler emerging from a cave shaped like the mouth of a jaguar. Around him are figures that seem half human, half divine, their eyes fixed on him as if witnessing a transformation. Beneath the altar, buried with care, were offerings of jade, pottery, and blood. To the Olmecs, this was not decoration. It was prophecy made stone, a message left for those who would come after, a message we still struggle to read. On another monument, faint but undeniable, our glyph scholars have tried to translate. They speak of a time when the sky would close, when darkness would swallow memory, when all would be forgotten. A curse carved in stone, a prophecy of erasure. Did the Olmecs believe their gods would one day turn against them? Did they know, even in their height, that their civilization was marked for oblivion? The thought is chilling. The prophecy does not speak of conquest, of famine, or of natural disaster. It speaks of forgetting. The sky will close and all will be forgotten. What kind of curse erases memory itself? What kind of power ensures that a people will vanish so completely that only fragments remain? The jaguar faces on their altar stare back with their eternal gaze, their mouths frozen between growl and smile, their eyes wide as though they know something we do not. Perhaps the Olmecs were warning us. Perhaps they left these images as the last testimony of what they had seen, what they had feared, what they had known. And now, as we stand in the ruins of their temples, we must ask, did they truly connect with forces beyond human comprehension? Did they open doors they cannot close? Did they worship gods that demanded too much, gods that repaid devotion not with blessing but with silence? The prophecy carved in stone lingers like a shadow. The sky will close and all will be forgotten. The jaguar gods stare from stone altars, their prophecy etched into rock. The sky will close and all will be forgotten. At first, it was only words carved in shadow, a warning few understood. But in time, the land itself began to whisper its truth. For across the Olmec world, villages and towns that once pulsed with life began to fall silent. Imagine walking through one of those settlements. A narrow path winds through fields of maize that have withered to ash. The air smells faintly of something burned long ago, though no fire flickers now. Homes of wood and clay still stand, their walls scarred with smoke, their doors open to the wind. Bowls rest on mats as though abandoned mid-meal. Tools lie scattered on the ground, waiting for hands that never returned. It is not the chaos of war, nor the slow rot of time. It is the silence of sudden absence, the eerie stillness of lives interrupted. Archaeologists have uncovered such places, Olmec villages that seem to have collapsed overnight. Crops burned in the fields, but not harvested. Houses deserted, but not destroyed. There are no mass graves, no signs of invasion, no weapons scattered in desperation. Only silence, as if entire communities rose at once, turned their backs on their lives, and vanished into mist. The first scholars to study these sites were baffled. They expected evidence of battle, the scars of conquest, the telltale signs of famine. Instead, they found order frozen in place, as though the villagers had simply stepped away from the world. Food still stored, tools still sharp, even sacred altars intact. Why would a people abandon everything with such finality? The detective's eye wanders through these ruins like a searcher in a crime scene. Here, a pot overturned but not broken. There, a hearth still blackened from the last fire. In one dwelling, a jade pendant lies beside a sleeping mat, as if its owner had taken it off before resting, intending to return for it, but never did. In another, footprints fossilized in mud lead toward the jungle's edge and then stop, as if swallowed by the earth. Each fragment whispers a story unfinished, an act interrupted, and yet there is no clear answer, only the heavy weight of absence. The Olmecs were not a people prone to carelessness. They built great ceremonial centers, engineered waterworks, sculpted stone with precision. Yet here, their villages crumble with mystery. Their people gone without leaving even their dead behind. Could famine have driven them out? Perhaps. But why abandon tools and treasures that could sustain them elsewhere? Could disease have struck? Possibly. Yet where are the bones, the signs of suffering? The silence grows louder the longer one looks. Legends tell of whole communities walking into the jungle, never to return. Some say they followed their priests, who claim the jaguar gods demanded migration. Others whisper curses of shadows falling over their villages, forcing them to flee into darkness. And some believe they did not walk away at all, but were taken, lifted from their homes by forces unseen, their absence not chosen but imposed. The jungle does not yield answers easily. Vines grow through the ruins. Trees split the walls. Roots coil around altars as if reclaiming what was once theirs. Nature consumes human absence quickly, but the sense of sudden departure lingers. Visitors speak of an unsettling energy, a feeling that the villagers are not gone but hidden, watching from just beyond a veil of sight. Consider San Lorenzo, one of the greatest Olmec centers. At its height, it was filled with platforms, plazas, monuments, a thriving hub of ritual and power. Then, around 900 BC, it collapsed. Not slowly, not with gradual decline, but suddenly. The monuments were defaced, the plazas abandoned, the people scattered. Some claim rival groups destroyed it. Yet evidence of battle is thin. Others believe its own inhabitants turned against their sacred center, abandoning it as though cursed. Whatever the reason, San Lorenzo became a city of ghosts almost overnight. Then La Venta rose, another center of power, filled with colossal altars and hidden caches of jade offerings. For centuries it thrived, only to meet the same fate. Abandoned, its temples left the jungle, its altars buried beneath sand and stone. Again, no mass graves, no shattered walls, just the quiet of disappearance. It is tempting to explain such abandonments with simple causes: drought, shifting rivers, political unrest. But the Olmecs leave behind something stranger: symbols, carvings, hidden caches, arrangements of jade buried deep beneath their plazas, as if in farewell. These were not random acts of collapse. They were gestures of ritual, hints that the Olmecs may have known their time was ending. At La Venta, archaeologists found entire mosaics of serpentine stone, carefully arranged in patterns, then deliberately buried. Why create such beauty only to conceal it? Why craft treasures of jade and bury them in silence? It is as though the Olmecs were performing rituals of departure, sealing their legacy beneath the earth before walking away, as if they knew they would not return. The detective in us demands answers. If they knew, how did they know? If they prepared, what did they prepare for? Was it a natural disaster foretold by priests reading the stars? Was it a fulfillment of a prophecy whispered by the jaguar gods? Or was it something more haunting still? A self-erasure, a deliberate disappearance, A civilization deciding to vanish before its doom could overtake it? The silence of these vanished villages becomes its own character in the story. It does not merely describe absence. It commands us to imagine the final moments. A mother leading her children into the jungle, leaving bowls of food behind. A priest standing before the village altar, whispering to gods, then extinguishing the fire for the last time. Farmers dropping their tools mid-harvest, staring at the sky as though waiting for something. These are not remnants of chaos, but of choice. The Olmecs did not run in panic. They departed with eerie calm, as if obeying a call none of us can hear. And yet, scattered in their ruins, carved into stones and hidden beneath offerings, symbols remain. Symbols that suggest they knew. Some glyphs depict skies closing, stars falling, jaguars swallowing sun. Others show figures walking into caves, disappearing into mouths shaped like serpents or jaguars. Are these metaphors of ritual or records of an actual event? Did the Olmecs believe they were being summoned by their gods, drawn into another realm? Or were they trying to tell us, in the only way they could, that they foresaw their own erasure? The prophecy we heard before it turns here with sharper teeth. The sky will close and all will be forgotten. Perhaps the Olmecs saw themselves not as victims, but as participants in that prophecy. Perhaps their vanished villages were not failures, but fulfillments, the living out of a destiny they accepted long before it came. And so, we are left with an unsettling vision. Entire cities gone overnight, like candles snuffed out by an invisible hand. Villages standing silent, waiting for people who never return. Symbols carved into stone, buried beneath earth, whispering of knowledge we cannot decode. The Olmecs vanished not with screams or bloodshed, but with silence. The kind of silence that feels planned, ritualized, deliberate. In that silence lies a hook for what comes next. For if they knew it would happen, if they prepared their own disappearance, then the question grows darker. What force compelled them? What truth did they see in their rituals, in their gods, in their jaguar visions that convinced them their end was inevitable? And most haunting of all, what if the prophecy was not about them alone, but about us all? The villages remain as hollow shells, swallowed by jungle, whispering with symbols that defy translation. And as we step away from them, one thought clings like shadow. The Olmecs may have known their end was coming, but they also left us warnings buried in silence, waiting for us to uncover. The silence of the vanished villages lingers like smoke, but deeper within the jungles of Veracruz and Tabasco lies something stranger still. Buried beneath centuries of soil, hidden in the roots of saber trees and strangled by vines, stand the remnants of colossal altars, massive blocks of basalt, carved into shapes so strange that even the most careful archaeologist hesitates to name them. To the Olmecs, these altars were more than stone. They were thrones for gods, portals for spirits, doorways for those who could walk between worlds. At first glance, they seem like monuments to rulers. Each altar is enormous, carved with faces and figures, some emerging from the mouths of caves, others seated in niches that resemble entrances to other realms. Their sheer size defies reason, weighing dozens of tons, dragged from quarries miles away without the use of wheels or beasts of burden. But what unsettles the observer is not only their size, it is their shape. They do not resemble the altars of sacrifice seen in later Mesoamerican cultures. Instead, they seem built for a passage, for being stepping through stone into our world or stepping away into another. At La Venta, one such altar depicts a ruler seated in the hollow of a great block, framed by the curling jaws of a cave-like mouth. His hands rest on cords, as though he is tethered to something beyond. Around him, carved figures kneel, their faces turned upward in awe. Is this a king upon a throne, or a shaman caught in transformation? To the Olmecs, caves were not merely holes in the earth. They were portals, mouths of the underworld, places where humans could cross into the realm of spirits. These altars, then, were not symbols of power. They were maps of passage. Legends whisper of shamans who could vanish between worlds. Clad in jaguar skins, their bodies painted with blood, they would sit upon these altars and enter trances. The people believed that through the smoke of incense and the rhythm of drums, the shaman spirit could slip into other realms. journeying into the underworld to speak with ancestors, rising into the sky to bargain with gods. These journeys were dangerous, but a line between worlds was thin. Some shamans returned with visions that guided their people. Others never returned at all. Their bodies left lifeless upon the stone, their spirits swallowed by the realms they dared to enter. The archaeologists who uncovered these altars saw only carvings, only stone. But those who lingered in their shadow confessed unease. Some said the air around them felt charged, heavy, as though the altars held more than empty space. Others claimed to dream of doorways, of corridors of light and darkness, after standing near them too long. The villagers who still lived near La Venta warned strangers not to touch them at night, when the jungle grows silent and the stars blaze overhead. For it is in darkness, they say, that the altars open. The design of the altars only deepens the mystery. Many are oriented to specific directions, aligned with celestial patterns. Some face the rising sun on solstices. Others align with the moon cycle. One in particular seems aimed not at anything we now see, but at a point in the sky long since moved by the turning of the heavens. Did the Olmecs build them as calendars? As instruments to measure the stars? Or did they see in those alignments something more? A doorway not only in space, but in time? Imagine standing before one of these altars on a moonless night. The jungle is still, the air thick with heat. The stars above shimmer with unnatural clarity. The altar looms, its carvings fade in the dark, its hollow niche waiting like an open mouth. You feel drawn to it, as though it recognizes you. The silence deepens, your breath slows, and you begin to wonder. If you sat there, if you closed your eyes, if you whispered the chants the Olmecs once spoke, would you return? Or would you vanish in the corridors no map can follow? This blending of archaeology and something more is what makes the Olmec altars so haunting. They are not random stones, not crude platforms for offerings. They are carved with precision, buried with intention, aligned with the heavens. At La Venta, entire offerings of jade were placed beneath them, then covered forever, as though sealing a bargain between earth and sky. Who were these offerings for? Not the living. They were buried too deep, too carefully, for any mortal eye to see. They were left for the gods or for the altars themselves. The symbols on these altars reveal stories. Some show men bound with cords, emerging from the mouths of beasts or caves. Others depict figures holding strange objects, as though carrying tools or weapons of otherworldly design. Still others show constellations, patterns of stars arranged not in the way we know them, but in unfamiliar formations. Did the Olmecs map the sky differently? Or did they carve constellations not of this world, but of another? The suspense grows sharper when we remember the vanished villages. Entire communities gone without struggle, leaving behind offerings as though in farewell. Were they preparing not for destruction, but for passage? Did their priests lead them to the altars, guiding them into another realm? Were the altars not only symbolic, but functional, gateways for an entire people to step through? If so, where did they go? Legends tell of a chosen few who could walk between worlds. They describe shamans who disappeared in smoke and returned days later with knowledge of the future. They tell of rulers who sat upon the altars and emerged changed, their eyes glowing with power, their words carrying weight that bent the will of their people. To the Olmecs, these were not stories of imagination. They were truths lived and feared, and the altars were the proof, carved in stone so their function would never be forgotten. But perhaps the most chilling detail lies in the alignments. Recent studies suggest that some of the carvings match star patterns. Yet when astronomers tried to trace them, they found something strange. The constellations did not match the skies of ancient Mesoamerica. They matched nothing we know on Earth. Some resemble patterns visible only tens of thousands of years ago, before human civilization began. Others seem not to belong to our sky at all, as if they record constellations from another vantage point in the universe. How could the Olmecs carve stars they cannot see? Unless, in their rituals and their trances, in their journeys to the altars, they glimpse skies beyond our own. The thought chills the spine. The altars are not only thrones or gateways. They are maps of a universe we should never see. A universe glimpsed by shamans who step beyond the veil, who return with visions carved in stone. Visions of skies that belong not to this earth, but to somewhere else, somewhere unfathomable. And so the question deepens. Were the Olmecs worshiping gods, or were they documenting encounters with beings from beyond? Were their shamans dreamers, or were they travelers, slipping between worlds of the altars as their vessels? The silence of the ruins offers no answer, but the carvings refuse to let the question rest. They demand that we ask, even if the asking terrifies us. The jungle covers most of what remains. Roots twist over altars, moss hides carvings, rains erode details. But the core of the mystery endures. Those who stand before the altars today still feel it. The weight of eyes unseen, the pull of worlds beyond. And when the stars blaze clear, when the night grows too quiet, some swear they hear whispers, faint and distant, like voices carried from another sky. It is here, at the edge of archaeology and myth, that the Olmecs leave us trembling, for their altars do not feel like relics of the past. They feel like messages, warnings, invitations, or perhaps maps for those who dare to follow. But the carvings they left behind raise a final, terrifying cliffhanger. The constellations they etched are not ours. They are windows into skies humanity should never have seen. In every corner of the Olmec world, from the colossal heads to buried altars, one truth emerges. Their rulers were no ordinary men. They were kings cloaked in myth, leaders who claimed not only authority but divinity. To the Olmecs, kings were not simply human beings elevated by chance or power. They were bloodlines descended from gods, chosen to stand between the fragile world of mortals and the vast, hungry realms of the divine. Power in such a world was not maintained by armies alone. It was held by rituals, by sacrifice, by calendars that measure the pulse of the universe itself. The Olmec kings claimed their bloodline was born from unions between jaguar gods and human mothers, between celestial beings and earthly flesh. Their faces, carved in colossal stone, were more than portraits. They were eternal witnesses, reminders that kings were not merely rulers of people, but anchors of reality itself. Imagine being an Olmec farmer, standing in a plaza where your king sits atop an altar shaped like the jaws of a cave. He wears a jaguar pelt across his shoulders, his body painted with blood and ash. He speaks words that seem not his own, words carried from gods who move the sun, who open and close the skies. How much of yourself would you surrender to such a figure? Would you give him your loyalty, your labor, your blood? Would you hand over your children if he said the gods demanded it? This was the psychology of fear and faith that shaped Olmec life. To disobey a king was to risk angering the god themselves. To doubt him was to doubt the fragile balance that kept the crops growing, the rivers flowing, the sun rising each morning. Fear pressed down on every heart, but so did reverence. For if the king truly was divine, if his blood carried the power of jaguar gods and celestial beings, then to serve him was to serve the universe. But power built on fear and faith has a dangerous edge. It must be fed constantly or it crumbles, and the Olmec kings fed it with blood. Ritual sacrifice was not spectacle but necessity. The flow of blood was the oil that kept the cosmic engine from grinding to a halt. Each drop was an offering, a promise to the gods that the people remember their place. At first, perhaps, the sacrifices were rare, symbolic, but as generations passed, as kings fought to maintain their divinity, the rituals escalated. In the ruins of La Venta and San Lorenzo, evidence whispers of madness. Altars stained darker than stone should be. Bones arranged in ways that suggest ritual, not burial. Jade offerings buried alongside children too young to have carried political guilt. The kings believed that by spilling blood, they could delay catastrophe, could hold open the sky against a prophecy that threatened to close it. But with each ritual, the line blurred further between devotion and obsession. The cosmic calendars drove much of this frenzy. The Olmecs were masters of timekeeping, reading the heavens with terrifying accuracy. They could predict eclipses, track the cycles of Venus, align their temples to the rising of stars. But such knowledge was a burden. Each celestial event became a crisis, a reminder that the sky was fragile, that at any moment it could fall. And so the kings turned calendars into weapons of fear. The gods demand blood. They would say, pointing to the alignment of stars, to the darkening of the sun, and the people obeyed, surrendering more of themselves, more of their lives, to keep balance with forces they could not see. The escalation reached points that still chill the imagination. Some scholars believe the kings performed acts that went beyond ritual into the realm of madness, burying entire offerings of jade and obsidian deep in the earth, not for human eyes, but for gods below. Others whisper of rulers demanding the sacrifice of nobles, even their own kin, to prove their bloodline's devotion. In such a world, where kings were divine and prophecy loomed like a storm cloud, nothing was unthinkable. The people lived under the weight of this dread, but they also lived in awe. To witness a ritual was to feel the boundaries of the world tremble. The drums thundered like heartbeats, incense filled the air, and the king's voice rose, declaring himself the bridge between worlds. He was not merely human. He was the bloodline of gods. The people believed because to doubt was to collapse the fragile balance. Faith became survival, and survival became submission. But behind the grandeur of the rituals, something darker brewed. Archaeologists excavating royal tombs in the Olmec heartland have uncovered remains that defy simple explanation. In one tomb, a ruler was buried with treasures of jade, serpentine, and obsidian, his body adorned with symbols of power. But when his bones were studied, they revealed anomalies. The proportions of the skull were elongated beyond the norm, his teeth filed into unnatural points. Was this deliberate modification, a king reshaping himself to appear divine? Or was it evidence of something stranger, something not entirely human? Another burial site revealed bones that bore marks of ritual cutting, not in death, but in life. Scars etched into the flesh, patterns carved into bone, as if the ruler's body had been remade in devotion to the gods. The people may have seen such figures and believed them to be truly different, truly descended from something beyond human. And perhaps, in their own way, they were the whispers of hybrid bloodlines, of kings who claim descent from jaguar gods. Take on new weight when confronted with these remains. Were they simply myths, exaggerated by faith and fear? Or did the Olmec kings carry within them something altered, something inherited from beings the people called divine? If the colossal heads were portraits of rulers, then their heavy features, their helmets, their solemn expressions may not have been entirely human after all. This is where the suspense sharpens to a knife's edge. For if the Olmec kings were not fully human, then what were they? If their bloodline truly linked them to gods, were those gods spirits of the earth and sky, or something else? Something that stepped through the portals of the stone altars, something that looked upon humanity as clay to be molded? The royal tombs, sealed in silence for centuries, now whisper truths the Olmecs themselves may have feared. Their kings were not simply rulers. They were embodiments of something other, anchors of a bloodline that tied the people to forces they could not control. And as their rituals grew darker, as their calendars drove them deeper into sacrifice, one must wonder, did the kings lose themselves to the madness of their own divinity? Or did they simply reveal what they had always been? The climax comes in a chilling revelation. In one tomb, deep beneath the ruins, the remains of a ruler were found so altered that scholars hesitate to classify them. The bones were longer than expected, the skull stretched, the jaw too wide. The proportions suggested not only ritual modification, but a being that may never have been entirely human to begin with. Buried with him were carvings of jaguars, serpents, and stars, symbols of transformation, power, and cosmic connection. The tomb was not only a resting place, it was a warning, a testimony to a bloodline that was never meant to be understood. The Olmec kings claimed descent from gods, their rituals fed by blood, and their calendars bound to the stars. But no ritual, no sacrifice, no prophecy could hold back the force that came next. For nature itself, or something darker that walked through it, rose against them. The Olmec world, once a cradle of temples, altars, and colossal heads, was shaken to its core by catastrophe. And the people who once called themselves the children of jaguar gods found their earth trembling beneath their feet, their rivers turning against them, and their sky blackened with ash. The stories we inherit from the soil are fragments, bones half buried, pots shattered, monuments toppled. Yet even broken fragments carry whispers. And from those whispers, we hear of floods and fire, The Olmecs wrote of the earth shaking and the rivers boiling. They told of rains that fell without end, of waters rising to swallow fields, of mountains roaring with molten fury. What they described was not the slow decay of time, but the sudden terror of a world unraveling. Archaeologists studying Olmec lands have found evidence of environmental upheaval. Layers of sediment suggest floods that buried villages, river courses that shifted violently, land scarred by tremors and volcanic ash. But alongside these natural scars, we find myths carved in stone, jaguars devouring the sun, serpents coiling through floods, gods with fiery breaths scorching the land. The Olmecs did not separate nature from myth. For them, catastrophe was not random. It was punishment. It was balance restored by powers far greater than themselves. Imagine the moment. The ground shakes beneath a great ceremonial plaza. Colossal heads, carved to last eternity, begin to crack. Priests fall to their knees, blood dripping from their hands, begging jaguar gods to spare them. The people gather, eyes wide with terror, as the earth trembles again harder, splitting the ground. From beneath, steam and boiling water erupt, rivers overturning, crops swallowed. Smoke rises from distant hills, glowing red against the night. And still the priests chant, their voices drowned by the roar of earth and fire. But what if it was not only nature? What if the Olmecs themselves played a part? Their rituals grew darker, their kings more desperate. Their calendars ticked toward prophecy, each eclipse an alignment convincing them the end drew near. Did they call upon forces too great to control? Did their ceremonies, meant to appease, instead provoke? The line between myth and reality bends here, and we must ask, were the Olmecs victims of nature, or did they trigger something forbidden? Some legends hint that the shamans opened doors they could not close, that in their desperation to keep the sky from shutting forever, they tore open the earth instead. They summoned God with jaguar faces, serpents with endless coils. Forces arrived not as saviors, but as destroyers. The rains came not as blessing, but as flood. The fire rose not as warmth, but as devastation. These tales may sound like myth, yet the scars in the earth echo them too closely to dismiss. The psychology of those final days must have been suffocating. Imagine living in a world where every tremor was seen as divine anger. Every storm is punishment. People surrendered more and more to their kings, to their priests, believing that only through sacrifice could the disasters be stopped. Fear became the air they breathed, and desperation drove their faith to madness. The kings escalated rituals. Blood flowed in rivers, yet the earth still shook. What happens to a people when the gods no longer answer, when their sacrifices vanish into silence? Faith collapses, or it mutates into obsession. And for the Olmecs, obsession may have been their undoing. Archaeological remains suggest abrupt changes in settlement patterns. Great centers like San Lorenzo fell. La Venta rose, only to suffer the same fate. Entire populations shifted, scattered, disappeared. Why abandon such centers? Was it simply the flooding of rivers, the ash of volcanoes, the collapse of agriculture? Or was it something more? When nature and myth entwine, we cannot separate flood from curse, fire from prophecy. To the Olmecs, both were true. The greatest mystery lies in what followed. After the chaos, their sacred cities stood empty. The plazas where kings once proclaimed their divine blood fell silent. The temples where priests chanted the jaguar gods crumbled, their fires extinguished. The colossal heads, once guardians of power, now stared across plazas void of life. The silence was not gradual. It was abrupt, as though the people had vanished all at once, leaving their gods to stone and shadow. We must picture it to feel the weight. A traveler enters a city days after the catastrophe. He finds no bodies, no warriors, no survivors, only silence. The air smells of ash. The rivers run high and murky. The fields lie drowned. Yet the city is not destroyed. The walls still stand. The plazas still spread wide. But no voices echo, no children laugh, no drum thunder. It is emptiness, a civilization hollowed in an instant. It is as if the gods themselves reached down, erased the people, and left their monuments behind as cruel reminders. Suspense grows when we recall the prophecy. The sky will close and all will be forgotten. Did the Olmecs believe their disasters were proof of that prophecy? Did they see in the trembling earth and boiling rivers a hand of God's fulfilling their promise? If so, then the emptiness of their cities is not only the mark of natural disaster, it is a signature of prophecy, carved not in stone but in silence. What chills the blood is the possibility that they themselves accepted it. Perhaps the kings, desperate to preserve order, led their people into final rituals of departure. Perhaps they believed that by abandoning their cities, by vanishing into the jungle, they could fulfill the gods' demand and preserve the balance of the world. Or perhaps the disasters broke their faith, shattered their belief, and they scattered, lost and forgotten in the forest of time. Yet again, we find symbols buried deep beneath the ruins, jade mosaics arranged in patterns, altars aligned with stars, caches of offerings sealed forever. They were not left in haste. They were placed with intention. This was not panic. It was ritual. And so the empty cities are not merely ruins. They are tombs of civilization, sealed by their own hands, abandoned as though erased deliberately. When the floods receded, when the fires dimmed, and when the trembling earth grew still, the sacred cities of the Olmecs remained standing, but they stood empty. Plazas that once pulsed with chants and drums lay in silence. Temples where kings once spilled blood for the gods stood abandoned. Colossal heads stared blankly across overgrown fields, their watch eternal yet unanswered. To the eye of history, the Olmecs had vanished. Their civilization, so suddenly risen, so impossibly advanced, had been erased in silence. And yet, silence is never the end, for silence often hides echoes. Archaeologists piecing together the fragments of Mesoamerican history whisper survivors. They believe that when the Olmec heartland fell, its people did not simply perish. They scattered. Some fled north, carrying with them fragments of their gods, their rituals, their knowledge. Others moved south into the highlands, merging with the seeds of new civilizations. The Mayans, the Toltecs, the Aztecs, all bore shadows of Olmec influence. The calendar, the ball game, the jaguar gods, the blood rituals, all echoes of the mother culture. It is tempting to believe that the Olmecs lived on through these children, their blood diluted but their memory preserved. But what if this was only the visible layer of the story? What if behind the visible world, there lingered an invisible one, a shadow civilization that haunted Mesoamerica long after the plazas fell silent? The thought grows stronger when we examine the gaps. The Mayans, brilliant in astronomy and architecture, claimed their gods gave them knowledge. The Aztecs, fierce and ritualistic, claimed their ancestors came from somewhere before, somewhere lost. The Toltecs, shrouded in myth, inherited practices too advanced to be their own invention. Again and again, the Olmec fingerprints appear, but never the whole hand. It is as though someone unseen whispered into the ears of later peoples, guiding them, shaping them, ensuring fragments of the Olmec way survived even as the name was forgotten. This is the mystery of the shadow civilization. The Olmecs may not have died. They may have gone underground, both literally and historically. The jungles of Veracruz and Tabasco are riddled with caves. To the Olmecs, caves were sacred places, mouths of the underworld, doorways between realms. When disaster struck, when the rivers boiled and the earth shook, perhaps they did not vanish into the air. Perhaps they descended into the earth, into the caves that swallowed their gods and their rituals. An underground exodus, hidden from the eyes of history, surviving in shadows while the surface world moved on. Legends among the Mayans tell of ancestors who lived in caves, who emerged only to plant crops, then returned below. Some myths speak of entire cities beneath the earth, lit by eternal fires, where the old gods still walk. Are these echoes of Olmec survivors, living in secrecy beneath the jungle, their existence concealed by choice or by necessity? Archaeologists digging into Olmec sites have found strange tunnels, chambers beneath altars, passages sealed with offerings. What were these for? Some suggest ritual burials. Others suspect something greater. Entrances to subterranean sanctuaries where survivors hid from catastrophe. If true, then the Olmecs did not vanish. They simply moved into the places where gods were believed to dwell. And in those hidden spaces, They may have continued their rituals, their sacrifices, their worship of skies we were never meant to see. But the shadow civilization may not have been only physical. It may have been historical, a deliberate erasure of their own name. Perhaps the Olmecs scattered among the people of Mesoamerica, carrying their knowledge but concealing their origin. Perhaps they wove themselves into the Mayans, the Zapotecs, the Mixtecs, living on not as conquerors but as ghosts in another story. And so the mother culture became invisible, guiding from shadows, never speaking its own name again. Suspense sharpens when we hear of explorers who entered these jungles centuries later. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Spanish chroniclers wrote of hearing drums deep in forests where no villages stood. Missionaries recorded voices chanting in the night, rising from places marked empty on their maps. Even in the 19th century, travelers wrote of hearing flutes and songs in ruins where no people lived, as if the stones themselves remembered. Some dismissed it as echoes, tricks of wind. Others whispered that the Olmecs had never left. They had only become shadows, keeping their rituals alive where no outsider could see. The psychology of such a hidden existence must have been profound. To live as survivors, scattered and unseen, yet believing themselves to still be chosen by the gods. To hide their bloodline, yet cling to rituals in secret. To erase their own name, yet preserve fragments of their knowledge in whispers past others. Such a civilization is not gone. It is transformed. It is a ghost that refuses to die, shaping history from shadows. But if they survived, why hide? Perhaps they feared the prophecy. Perhaps they believed that to speak their name was to invite the curse, to draw down the sky that threatened to close. Or perhaps they hid because they had learned too much. If the Olmec kings had truly been something other than human, if their altars had opened doors to skies not our own, then the survivors may have hidden to keep the world safe, or to keep themselves safe from the world. Even today, in remote corners of Mexico, villagers whisper of voices in the jungle at night, of drums that beat where no people live. Hunters claim to see fires flickering deep in caves, only to vanish when approached. Some speak of figures that move in silence, watching, their faces hidden, their presence felt but never proven. Are these only stories? Or are they the faint breath of a civilization that refused to die? The Olmecs may have become invisible, but invisibility is not absence. It is presence hidden by choice, by fear, or by power. The shadows of their culture lingered in every great civilization that followed, shaping gods, rituals, and calendars. And perhaps, in ways we cannot yet measure, they linger still. The shadow civilization lingered in whispers, drums echoing through jungles where no people lived, fires flickering in caves the world had forgotten. But then came a discovery that would draw the mystery out of darkness and into human hands. A manuscript surfaced, fragile and incomplete, a codex of strange symbols that seemed older than memory, older even than the civilizations that rose after the Olmecs. To hold it was to feel the weight of something forbidden. To read it was to invite madness. The codex was unlike anything scholars had seen. The paper, or what passed for it, was layered with fibers, coated in pigments that had resisted time. On its pages were glyphs that bore resemblance to Olmec symbols carved on stone monuments. Yet here they were not scattered or ceremonial. They were ordered, deliberate, written as if to preserve a message too important to entrust to monuments alone. And between the glyphs were drawings, constellations, altars, jaguar face figures, rivers boiling, mountains in flame. Each image felt less like history and more like prophecy. The first scholar who studied it dismissed it as a fraud, a colonial-era invention meant to mimic antiquity. Yet even he admitted to unease. The symbols matched too closely to carvings found in San Lorenzo and La Venta, details no forger of that era could have known. Others began to pore over it, tracing the glyphs, comparing them to fragments of Olmec art. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The codex was not simply myth. It was instruction. It spoke of cycles. The cycle of the sun, the cycle of the stars, the cycle of civilizations. It described alignments when the sky would grow thin, when the earth would tremble, when portals would open through stone. It spoke of blood as the fuel of the universe, of sacrifice as the bridge between worlds. But most unsettling of all, it spoke of erasure, not the erasure of memory by time, but erasure chosen by the people themselves. The codex suggested that the Olmecs knew their end was near, and more than that, they chose it. Those who studied the codex began to change. One man reported nightmares of colossal heads staring through his window, their eyes glowing faintly in the night. Another spoke of hearing drums in his dreams, drums that grew louder until he woke trembling, his chest pounding with a rhythm not his own. A third refused to speak at all, locking himself in his study, muttering only that the sky is not ours. When he was found days later, his notes were filled with drawings of constellations no astronomer could identify, patterns that did not belong to Earth's sky. The codex seemed less a manuscript than a mirror, reflecting into the minds of its readers visions they could not escape. Some hallucinated jaguars pacing the corners of their rooms, eyes gleaming with fire. Others swore they heard voices whispering from the pages, speaking in tongues no language could contain. And yet, despite the dread, they could not stop reading. It was as if the codex bound them, drawing them deeper, feeding on their obsession. As fragments were translated, a chilling revelation emerged. The Olmecs had not been erased by floods or fire alone. They had not been victims of nature. Their disappearance was deliberate. The codex described a covenant made by kings and priests, a decision to end their presence in the world above. The words were clear. We will close the sky, and we will be forgotten, for only then shall balance return. Why would people choose to erase themselves? What terror, what knowledge could drive such a choice? The scholars argued, but their arguments dissolved into fear. Some believed the Olmecs had glimpsed a truth too great for humanity to bear. Others thought they had summoned gods that demanded silence in exchange for survival. A few whispered that they had not vanished at all, that they had stepped through the portals described in the codex, into skies not our own, carrying their civilization into realms beyond human reach. The suspense deepens when we recall the disasters, the floods, the boiling rivers, the trembling earth. Were these punishments, or were they signs of the covenant? Perhaps the Olmecs unleashed forces they could not control, and rather than let those forces consume the world, they chose to withdraw. Erasure was not defeat. It was sacrifice on the grandest scale, a civilization offering itself to preserve balance. But the codex is incomplete. Pages are missing, torn away. The final section ends abruptly, as though silenced mid-sentence. What was written there? Did it reveal where they went? Did it name the gods they bargained with? Or did it warn of a return, a time when forgotten would rise again? We cannot know, for the page is gone. But absence is its own terror. For sometimes what is missing speaks louder than what remains. The psychological weight of this absence has broken more than one reader. Scholars who searched for the missing page became obsessed, abandoning their careers, wandering jungles in search of ruins that might hold a clue. One vanished entirely, leaving only a final note. The drums call me. I must listen. Another was found dead beside the codex, his last words scrawled in trembling ink. It is not prophecy. It is instruction. The codex does not simply describe history. It commands it. The symbols are not only records. They are rituals waiting to be completed. Some readers claim the constellations in its pages shifted when stared too long, realigning themselves into patterns that burned into the mind. One man swore he saw stars moving across the page like living things. When asked to point them out, he laughed until he wept, whispering, "They are not our stars. They are not our sky." Here the suspense arc tightens. The codex reveals that the Olmecs chose their erasure. They closed the sky upon themselves, stepping into silence. But why? Were they protecting the world from something they unleashed? Or were they obeying gods who demanded they vanish? The missing final page holds the answer, but it is lost, torn away, perhaps hidden deliberately to prevent us from knowing. Perhaps it was destroyed by those who feared what it contained. Or perhaps it waits, buried in earth, sealed in a cave, guarded by shadows that still drum in the night. The forbidden codex ended with silence, a torn page, a prophecy unfinished, a warning never revealed. And yet the fragments it left behind told us enough. The Olmecs did not simply fall to flood or fire. They did not vanish only by chance or by conquest. Their erasure was deliberate. A civilization that carved colossal heads from mountains, that align their temples with the stars, that claim bloodlines of gods and open altars like doorways, chose to step away from history itself. The Olmecs may have built everything only to leave it behind, sealing their presence in silence. This is perhaps the most haunting truth of all. We are taught that civilizations rise and fall by accident. Famine, war, disease, the randomness of time. But what if the Olmecs looked at their world, looked at what they had unleashed, and decided that the only path forward was disappearance? Their monuments remain, their colossal faces stare through centuries, but the people themselves dissolve like smoke. To erase oneself is not collapse, it is choice. The psychology of such a choice defies understanding. Imagine a people who believed their kings were descended from gods, who read the stars as messages, who saw in every tremor and eclipse the shadow of prophecy. They had touched something beyond themselves, perhaps too closely. Their rituals had grown darker, their altars more dangerous. Their codex spoke of erasure as destiny. And so, rather than wait for destruction, they chose silence. Perhaps they believed silence was mercy. There is tragedy in this, but there is awe as well, for it means the Olmecs may have understood their fate more clearly than we ever will. They may have glimpsed the cycles of civilizations, seen the collapse of worlds written in the stars, and decided to vanish before their own corruption poisoned the earth. Or perhaps they transcended entirely, stepping not into ruin but into another realm. Did they walk into caves believing they would emerge into skies beyond ours? Did they bury their treasures as offerings to gods who opened doors unseen? Did they abandon their cities not in defeat, but in passage, choosing eternity over time? The evidence bends between both possibilities. On one hand, their abandonment was deliberate, jade mosaics buried in silence, caches of offerings sealed forever, altars carved to resemble portals. These were not acts of panic. They were rituals of closure. The Olmecs wrote their own ending, a ritualized vanishing that denied future generations their story. They wanted to be forgotten, and yet echoes of them remained. The Mayans, the Aztecs, the Toltecs, all carried pieces of their gods, their calendars, their rituals. It is as if the Olmecs vanished yet refused to die, their spirit flowing invisibly through those who followed. They became shadows in history, ghosts in new empires, whispering from the past. Perhaps this was their plan, not to die, not to conquer, but to scatter their essence like seeds in the soil of time. But there is another possibility, one darker still. Perhaps they vanished not to protect themselves, but to protect us. The Codex suggests they had seen too much, learned too much, opened doors that could not remain open. What if they realized that the knowledge they carried was a curse? What if they feared that future generations, inheriting their power, would unleash the same forces that shook their earth and boiled their rivers? Erasure, then, would not be defeat, but sacrifice. By choosing silence, by stepping away, they seal the knowledge, protecting those who came after. This is where all becomes terror, for the Olmecs erased themselves to protect us. Then what had they unleashed? What had they seen in skies not our own? What beings had whispered through their altars? What truths had stared to the jaguar faces they carved? We cannot know. The final page is missing. The silence remains unbroken. And in that silence, we are left to wonder if the Olmecs saved us or abandoned us to the same fate. The suspense grows sharper when we consider the colossal heads. They are not scattered randomly. They are placed like sentinels, facing outward, their eyes heavy with watchfulness. Were they monuments to kings, or were they guardians left behind? Stone witnesses meant to keep watch over secrets buried in the earth? Their expressions are too solemn, too eternal, to be mere portraits. They feel like warnings, like faces carved to stare forever at those who dare to ask too much. Imagine walking among them at dusk, when the jungle grows quiet, when the air feels heavy with memory. Their eyes seem to follow you, their silence pressing against your thoughts. You begin to wonder, were they carved to remember rulers, or were they carved to guard the truth? The Olmecs may have disappeared, but the heads remain, standing like anchors that keep their erasure from becoming total. They are the last link, the last breath of a people who chose silence, but left behind watchers to remind us that silence has a price. And so the tragedy of the Olmecs is not only that they vanished, It is that they chose to vanish. They built everything. Cities aligned with the stars, altars shaped like portals, colossal heads carved from mountains, and then they walked away, leaving only fragments. What could drive a people to erase themselves? Perhaps they sought transcendence, believing they could step into eternity. Perhaps they feared themselves, believing they had touched powers too dangerous to leave in human hands. Either path is haunting, and both end in silence. The all lies in the possibility that they succeeded, that somewhere beyond our reach, beyond our skies, the Olmecs still exist, not as ruins, but as something else, something we cannot comprehend. If they transcended, then their erasure was not tragedy, but transformation. They became what their gods promised, merging with jaguars, serpents, stars. But if they erase themselves only to protect us, then their silence is sacrifice, their absence the price of our survival. The final suspense lies in the fact that we do not know which is true. The Olmecs wrote their ending in silence, sealed their codex with absence, carved their guardians in stone. They left no clear answer, only questions. Did they step into eternity, or did they die in sacrifice? Did they vanish as victims, or as protectors? The silence holds both truths, and the colossal heads refuse to speak. The Olmecs may have chosen silence, but their shadows linger. Their colossal heads still rise from the jungle floor, their stone eyes unblinking, their secrets heavy in the air. They wait, not only as monuments of stone, but as echoes of something humanity was never meant to fully grasp. And now, as their story closes, one truth remains. Mystery never truly ends. It only waits for those willing to follow its whisper. Perhaps tonight, as you stare at the sky, you'll feel the same unease the Olmecs felt. The sense that we are not alone, that the universe holds truths both wondrous and terrible, and that civilizations may choose silence not because they were defeated, but because they knew too much. If this tale stirred something in you, wonder, sadness, fear, or fascination, then stay with us. There are more stories buried in the ruins, more secrets hidden in the earth, more civilizations that rose and fell and left behind whispers waiting to be heard. Together, we can walk deeper into those shadows, uncover what time tried to erase, and keep alive the memory of worlds that chose to vanish. So, before the silence returns, let your voice be heard. Like this story, share with others who crave the forgotten. Leave your thoughts below, and join this journey by subscribing. Every story is a key, every legend a doorway, and what lies ahead will be darker, stranger, and even more unforgettable. The colossal heads wait, the ruins wait, and so does the next story.